Today, I will introduce the endgame for Islam. We begin with the story of Moses from Surah 28, 23-29, according to the translation by Mustafa Khattab in the Clear Qur'an. When he arrived at the well of Midian, he found a group of people watering their herds. Apart from them, he noticed two women holding back their herd. He asked them, "What is the problem?" They replied, "We cannot water our animals until the other shepherds are done, for our father is a very old man." So he watered their herd for them, then withdrew to the shade and prayed, "My Lord, I am truly in desperate need of whatever provision you may have in store for me." Then one of the two women came to him, walking bashfully. She said, "My father is inviting you, so he may reward you for watering our animals for us." When Moses came to him and told him his whole story, the old man said, "Have no fear. You are now safe from the wrongdoing people." One of the two daughters suggested, "Oh, my dear father, hire him. The best man for employment is definitely the strong and trustworthy one." The old man proposed, "I wish to marry one of these two daughters of mine to you, provided that you stay in my service for 8 years. If you complete 10, it will be a favor from you, but I do not wish to make it difficult for you. Allah willing, you will find me an agreeable man." Moses responded, "Then it is settled between you and I. Whichever term I fulfill, there will be no further obligation on me, and Allah is a witness to what we say." When Moses had completed the term and was traveling with his family, he spotted a fire on the side of Mount Tur. He said to his family, "Stay here, for I've spotted a fire. Perhaps from there I can bring you some directions or a torch from the fire so you may warm yourselves." It looks like Muhammad reversed two stories that appear in the Torah. We find them in Genesis 29 and Exodus 2. Let's read them carefully, paying attention to the details. The story of Moses' marriage from Exodus 2, verses 15-22. When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. When they came home to their father, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. She gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Exodus 3, verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Note that Zipporah, the future wife of Moses, was one of 7 sisters, not one of 2 sisters. Here is the story of Jacob's marriage. Genesis 29, verses 13-30. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go in to her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also, in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. If you did not realize it, this part of the story of Jacob occurred more than 200 years prior to the part of the story of Moses that we just read. Since Muhammad was an illiterate Arab who was not able to read the Torah himself, he relied upon hearing stories of the biblical prophets by word of mouth. He learned the stories most likely from the Jews who taught him orally, but which he could not verify for himself by reading the Torah, exactly as is mentioned in Surah 25 verses 4 and 5. The disbelievers say, "This Qur'an is nothing but a fabrication which he made up with the help of others." Their claim is totally unjustified and untrue, and they say, "These revelations are only ancient fables which he has had written down, and they are rehearsed to him morning and evening." Perhaps these Jews may have deliberately told Muhammad the story the wrong way in order to prevent the conversion of Jews to Islam in the future. Now I will deal with the only counter-argument that Muslims have, and the claim that they have no choice but to fall back upon, or else they must acknowledge Islam is false. They are forced to claim that the Torah was corrupted by the Jews no later than 250 years before Jesus, and which means it would have been corrupted more than 860 years before Muhammad. If we follow that Islamic reasoning, there must have been an original version of the stories of Moses and Jacob in the Torah that matched the Quran's version. In the Quran, there is no mention of Jacob's story, so the difference occurs in Moses' story. That means the mention of Moses serving a term for his marriage, which is mentioned only in the Quran, has to have been in the original Torah before it was supposedly corrupted by the Jews. If the Islamic claim is true, how could the Jews have corrupted the Torah so that it told the stories in the way it does now? There may be two possible explanations. One, that Moses' contracted term for marriage was removed from the original story, but that Jacob's original story didn't look any different than it does in today's Torah. So, in this view, the Torah version of Jacob's story has always said that he had contracted terms for both his marriages. That wouldn't have changed. The only change was in Moses' story. The alternative explanation is that the original Torah told the story of Jacob without any terms for his marriages, while the story of Moses did have a term for his marriage. The Jews must have changed both accounts and switched them around, such that the term for marriage in Moses' story was transferred over to Jacob, leaving Moses without any contracted term for his marriage. So, in the first view, only Moses' story changed with the removal of a term for his marriage. In the second view, both stories changed with the reversal of who had a term for his marriage, moving the term from Moses to Jacob. What are the possible explanations? Let's look at the first explanation, that only Moses' term was removed. It's obvious that there is no reason for the Jews to have taken their Torah scrolls and removed Moses agreeing to a term of service for his marriage. What possible reason could there have been? This doesn't affect any doctrine, like original sin or the Trinity, or any motivation to intentionally change the account. Nor is it about a moral issue that someone might think would taint the character of Moses or that would exonerate him from bad behavior. It doesn't make him look any better or worse, and it is definitely not an unintentional mistake that could be accounted for by a scribe. It is too complex of a change for it to be an accident. Given that there can be no motivation to change Moses' story, and because it is too complex of a change for it to be a copying mistake, we can discard this explanation. Let's look at a second explanation, that the stories about the marriage arrangements for Jacob and Moses were switched around by the Jews. It is widely accepted by all Muslims, Christians, and Jews as a fact that there were 12 tribes of Israel. They numbered 12 simply because of the 12 sons of Jacob. Remember that Jacob was also named Israel. As Genesis tells us, these 12 sons were born from 4 different women. 2 of them, named Leah and Rachel, were sisters. These were the 2 wives that Jacob married. Each of the sisters had 1 maidservant. Their names were Bilhah and Zilpah. 2 were wives, 2 were concubines. Jacob had children from each of these 4 women. Because the 2 wives of Jacob were sisters, they ended up in competition with each other to give birth to more children than the other sister. As a result of this, when Leah or Rachel were unable to have children for a time, they gave Jacob their female servants as surrogates to continue the competition. They followed the same situation that previously occurred with Sarah, who gave her maidservant Hagar to Abraham when Sarah was unable to have children herself. The sole reason for Jacob to have 2 wives instead of only 1 wife in the first place was because their father Laban tricked Jacob. Laban promised to have the youngest daughter Rachel married to Jacob after he served Laban for the 7 years he agreed to. Instead, Laban gave Jacob the oldest daughter Leah on the wedding night. Jacob was furious since he was now trapped being married to Leah. The next day, Laban manipulated Jacob by proposing another term of work for an additional 7 years, in which case Jacob would only need to complete his honeymoon period with Leah, and then he could marry Rachel right after that time. He would be stuck working for Laban for another 7 years, yet Jacob agreed. That's how the nation of Israel began, as Jacob's 12 sons who were the heads of the 12 tribes and the fathers of the nation. If we follow the second Muslim hypothetical explanation, in which the marriage stories for Moses and Jacob were switched with each other, it would require a massive number of changes. Why? Because the account of Jacob's wives and the 12 sons he had from them is the foundational story for the nation of Israel. This would require an unimaginable number of changes across the entire Bible, both Old and New Testaments, and in almost every single book. For example, who could track down and fix all the verses that mention Jacob in the books that are not part of the Torah? For example, in the book of Ruth, written over 300 years after Moses, we read from Ruth chapter 4, verse 11 and 12, "Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, 'We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman.'" Here the Jews mention Rachel and Leah as being the foundation of the nation of Israel. This refers back to the story of Jacob's marriage that we read in Genesis 29. In another part of the Old Testament, in the book of the prophet Hosea, which was written over 700 years after Moses, we read this from Hosea chapter 12, verse 12. "Jacob fled to the land of Aram. There Israel served for a wife, and for a wife he guarded sheep." This is a verse which distinctly recalls that it was Jacob who served in Mesopotamia to get his beloved wife Rachel, and not Moses who served to get his wife in the land of Midian, as it was written in the Qur'an. These clear indications, supported by many other references, are factual proofs that the story of Jacob's marriage that involved terms of service was never corrupted in the Torah by the Jews. It is even referenced elsewhere in the Old Testament. Muhammad had the bad habit of confusing different stories and characters of the Bible. This is shown in the story of Saul from Surah 2:247 to 251, where Muhammad unknowingly included 2 stories that had nothing to do with Saul or David. These were the return of the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines, from 1 Samuel 5 and 6, in which the Ark returned decades before Saul was chosen to be king. In the second story, Muhammad mistakenly confused Saul with Gideon when Gideon chose his soldiers for his army by the way they drank from the river, in Judges 7. Muhammad also confused Mary, the mother of Jesus, with Miriam, the sister of Aaron and Moses. These 2 women lived at totally different time periods. He also relocated the construction of the Tower of Babel from Mesopotamia to Egypt at the time of Pharaoh, and attributed Haman, who lived 1,000 years after Pharaoh and Moses, as the main builder. Based on the numerous errors we have pointed out, we can confidently say that Muhammad confused the story of Jacob's marriage with the story of Moses' marriage. After refuting both possibilities for the Qur'an to be correct and the Torah being wrong, we reach this inevitable conclusion. Muhammad was the true author of the Qur'an, whether of his own accord or through a scribe. He mixed up the two stories because the details of the choice of women offered to Moses is the same choice offered to Jacob, namely, between two sisters. Two other parts of the Qur'an's account prove that Muhammad mixed up the true account of Jacob and Moses in the Torah. Firstly, Moses in Exodus arrived first at the well and sat down alone. Then the 7 daughters of Jethro came to water their flock. As they were drawing the water to fill the troughs, some male shepherds came and pushed them away and took the water that the women had drawn for their own flocks. Moses then stepped in and stopped the men from harassing the women and finished watering the flock for the women. In the book of Genesis, when Jacob arrived at the well, he was not the first one to arrive as Moses was. Other male shepherds were already there. It was their custom to wait for all the shepherds to arrive so that they could water the flocks together, because the well had a heavy cover over it that needed to be moved on and off. Then Jacob saw Rachel arriving with her flock. He decided he would remove the heavy lid himself and water her flock. There had been no conflict with any male shepherds. The Qur'an's account of the incident of Moses at the well matches exactly with Jacob's encounter with Rachel in Genesis 29. In each account, Jacob in Genesis and Moses in the Qur'an do not arrive at the well first. Male shepherds were already at the well. But in Exodus, Moses arrived at the well first and then fought off the shepherds. We can see that the Qur'an's chronicle of Moses has been exchanged with the biblical chronicle of Jacob. Once Jacob had finished his honeymoon week with Leah, he was allowed to marry Rachel. After completing his second term of 7 years of service, he and his family packed their bags and traveled from Haran to the land of Canaan. This is found in Genesis chapter 31, verses 17 and 18. In Exodus, after Moses married his one and only wife Zipporah, Moses didn't travel anywhere. He stayed in the land of Midian for 40 years. Only after all that time, while Moses was alone as he was keeping the flock of his father-in-law's sheep, he saw the burning bush in the wilderness of Horeb, the mountain of God, which is known as Mount Sinai. It was there that God told him to return to Egypt to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Prior to that, Moses had not intended to go anywhere. In the Qur'an, Moses married one of the 2 sisters after working a term of service, and when that term of service was completed, he packed his bags with his family and traveled back to Egypt. On the way, he encountered the burning bush. Obviously, Muhammad mistakenly thought of Moses traveling back to Egypt with his family, when it was really the biblical story of Jacob returning with his family from Haran to Canaan. What is more, Moses didn't actually travel with his family. According to Exodus 18, Moses left his wife and 2 sons back with his father-in-law Jethro in Midian when he traveled back to Egypt with Aaron, his brother, to liberate the Israelites from slavery. All this evidence points out the glaringly obvious that the Qur'an is a faulty fabrication and reveals that its true author was not the all-knowing God, but Muhammad Ibn Abdullah, an illiterate Bedouin. These indisputable facts make Islam a man-made religion.